Close your eyes for a moment and picture the Roman Forum. You probably see toga-clad senators debating the fate of the empire, or legions marching off to war. But if you listen closely, beneath the grand political speeches, you'll hear a different sound, the unmistakable, joyful sound of children's laughter. That's the world we're stepping into today. We often get so caught up in the military conquests and the political intrigue of ancient Rome that we forget an entire generation was growing up right in the heart of it all. What was it like to be a child in the shadow of the Colosseum? What games did they play when they weren't studying rhetoric or learning about their family's gods? The answer is far more surprising and infinitely more human than you might think. Their play wasn't just a simple distraction, it was a mirror of their society, a training ground for the future, and sometimes it was shockingly dangerous. Today we are pulling back the curtain on Roman childhood to uncover the games they played. We're going on an investigative journey to explore everything from simple games of chance played with knucklebones, which were literally the ankle bones of sheep, to full-blown mock gladiator battles staged in backyards with wooden swords. This was a world where play could be whimsical one moment and a brutal lesson in social hierarchy the next. Through their toys and their pastimes, Roman children weren't just having fun, they were learning the rules of their world. They were absorbing what it meant to be a Roman citizen, a soldier, a master, or a slave. The innocence of their games was often layered with the very real expectations and pressures of their culture, and by understanding their play, we get a unique ground-level view of history that the history books often miss. So prepare to be surprised. We'll discover how a simple ball game could teach strategy, how a doll could be a symbol of a girl's future duties, and just how far parents would let their children go in mimicking the violent spectacles of the arena. This is more than just a list of ancient pastimes. It's a journey into the hearts and minds of the Roman Empire's youngest inhabitants. It's a story of laughter, competition, and the universal desire to play, all set against one of history's most formidable backdrops. Stick with us because the games are about to begin, and they reveal a side of ancient Rome you've never seen before. To understand the games Roman children played, we first have to let go of our modern notion of play as a simple break from work or learning. In the Roman world, the line between recreation and preparation was incredibly blurry. For a child growing up in the Republic or the Empire, play was a fundamental part of their curriculum for life. It was the primary method through which they absorbed the values, skills, and social hierarchies that defined their world. A boy's toy sword wasn't just a piece of wood. It was a tool for building the muscle memory and aggressive spirit expected of a future legionary. A girl's doll wasn't merely a plaything. It was a miniature representation of herself, a practice tool for the maternal and domestic duties she would be expected to master. Every game, every pastime was layered with purpose, silently instructing the next generation on how to fit into the intricate machine of Roman society. This educational framework for play was heavily influenced by the Greeks, whom the Romans both admired and conquered. Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle had written extensively on the importance of games in shaping a child's character, suggesting that the activities children engage in naturally form the foundation of their adult virtues. The Romans, ever practical, adopted this philosophy but gave it their own distinct utilitarian twist. They saw childhood as a brief window to mold a citizen, and play was the most effective clay. So while a Greek boy might play athletic games to celebrate the human form, a Roman boy was often engaged in games that simulated combat or oratory, directly preparing him for the forum or the battlefield. This wasn't about fostering creativity for its own sake. It was about drilling in competence, instilling a sense of order, and reinforcing the starkly different paths laid out for boys and girls. For Roman boys, the goal was to produce a citizen soldier, a man who could argue a case in the law courts one day and command a century on a distant frontier the next. Their games reflected this dual purpose. Mock battles with wooden gladius swords and pila javelins were common, teaching boys formations, tactics, and the feel of weapons in their hands. They played a kind of field hockey, a fierce and physical team sport that developed strength, coordination, and the ability to withstand pain. Even board games like those played with dice or knucklebones were less about chance and more about teaching strategic thinking and calculating odds, skills vital for a general planning a campaign or a politician weighing a risk. From a very young age, their play was a deliberate rehearsal for the competition, ambition, and violence that underpinned a man's life in Rome. The experience for girls was entirely different, yet equally purposeful. Their future was not the Senate floor but the heart of the domus, the household. Their games were a training ground for their roles as matrons, managers, and mothers. A girl's most cherished possession was often her doll, but these were not the simple rag dolls of other eras. Archaeological finds have uncovered dolls with articulated limbs made of ivory or carved bone, sometimes accompanied by entire miniature sets of furniture, jewelry, and even toiletries. Through this doll play, a young girl was practicing. She was learning how to dress, care for, and present herself and her future children. She was managing her miniature household, a direct rehearsal for the immense responsibility of running a Roman home, which could include overseeing slaves, managing budgets, and organizing domestic rituals. Their play was quiet, domestic, and contained, mirroring the social boundaries of their adult lives. This structured view of play even had its critics among Roman philosophers, who occasionally voiced concerns about its intensity. Some wondered if the relentless focus on future roles robbed children of their childhood, forcing them to grow up too quickly. Yet this very pressure reveals the core Roman belief that an individual's identity was inseparable from their utility to the state and the family. A child's play was never just their own, it was a transaction with society, a down payment on the adult they were obligated to become. So when we look at a simple collection of knucklebones or a fragment of a terracotta doll, we are not just looking at toys. We are looking at the building blocks of the Roman world, tiny instruments used to construct soldiers, statesmen, and matrons, one game at a time. Now let's move from the playing fields and the domestic sphere to the tabletops, where Romans of all ages engaged in battles of wits. If you think board games are a modern pastime, think again. The Romans were absolutely fanatical about them, and two games in particular reigned supreme: the accessible, everyman's game of calculi and the deeply strategic, almost philosophical challenge of Latrunculi. These weren't just ways to kill time, they were mental gymnasiums, sharpening the mind for the calculations and deceptions of daily life. First, consider calculi, which literally means pebbles or counters. This was the Roman equivalent of checkers, a game of straightforward capture that was utterly ubiquitous. You wouldn't need a fancy store-bought set. A player could simply scratch a grid of squares into a patch of dirt, on a stone step, or even onto a piece of wood. More permanent boards, called tabulae, have been found carved into the steps of public buildings and basilicas, evidence of merchants, soldiers, and politicians whiling away their idle moments. Each player had a set of identical pieces, often just differently colored stones, shells, or bits of pottery. The goal was simple: to capture your opponent's pieces by jumping over them, one by one, until one player was left dominant on the board. It was a game of immediate tactical skirmishes, requiring a sharp eye for the board and the ability to plan one or two moves ahead. Its beauty was in its simplicity and portability. A game could be started anywhere at any time, making it the perfect companion for a long wait or a leisurely afternoon in the forum. But for those who craved a deeper, more cerebral challenge, there was Latrunculi, the game of little soldiers or mercenaries. This was the chess of the Roman world, a game of high strategy, feints, and outright conquest that mirrored the military mindset of its creators. The board was larger, typically an 8x8 or 12x8 grid, and the pieces, the little soldiers, had different roles. There were ordinary pieces called milites or soldiers, and one special, more powerful piece known as the dux or aquila, the leader or the eagle. The objective was to strategically surround your opponent's pieces, immobilizing them and removing them from the board, with the ultimate goal often being the capture of their ducks. This required not just aggression but profound cunning. Players had to think several moves ahead, setting elaborate traps and sacrificing less important pieces to gain a decisive positional advantage. The military metaphor was intentional and potent. Every match was a miniature campaign. You were a general moving his troops, looking for weak points in the enemy's formation, trying to outmaneuver and envelop them. The poet Lupanar perfectly captures this spirit, writing about a player who moves his glass soldier with a cautious hand, highlighting the careful deliberation the game demanded. Winning at Latrunculi wasn't about luck, it was about demonstrating superior intellect, foresight, and a willingness to be ruthless. It was the preferred game of military officers, statesmen, and philosophers, anyone who understood that true victory in life often came not from brute force, but from superior strategy and the ability to anticipate an opponent's every move. To play Latrunculi was to train your mind for the complexities of command, both on the battlefield and in the political arena, proving that for the Romans, the most intense contests often took place on a small, checkered board. But beyond the strategic battlegrounds of Latrunculi lay a world of pure, exhilarating chance, a world where fortune, not foresight, was the ultimate ruler. This was the domain of dice games, a pastime so deeply embedded in Roman culture that it captivated everyone from common street urchins to the emperor himself. For the Romans, the role of the dice was a direct conversation with the goddess Fortuna, a thrilling surrender to fate that offered the promise of instant wealth or the sting of humiliating loss. The tools of this trade came in two distinct forms. First, there were the tali. These weren't the cubic dice we know today. They were four-sided knucklebones, specifically the astragalus bones from the hind legs of sheep or goats. Each of the four long, irregular sides had a different value. The concave side was worth 3, the convex side 4, the flat side 1, and the opposite flat side 6. When thrown, they would land in unpredictable ways, their organic, uneven shape adding a layer of chaotic chance that machine cubes could never replicate. Then you had the tesserae. These were the true ancestors of modern dice, 6-sided cubes made of bone, ivory, or even precious materials like amber, with dots or pips, numbered from 1 to 6. A complete game often involved throwing either 4 tali or 3 tesserae from a special cylindrical cup called a fritillus. This cup wasn't just for convenience, it was a crucial piece of gaming etiquette and superstition, designed to prevent cheating by ensuring the dice were properly randomized and tumbled before their fateful reveal on the table. The games played with these implements were numerous, but the most famous and prestigious was known as the Venus throw. When casting 4 tali, the highest possible roll wasn't 4 sixes. It was when each of the 4 bones showed a different value, a 1, a 3, a 4, and a 6. This rare combination, a perfect display of variety, was named after Venus, the goddess of love and luck, and it was an automatic, unbeatable win. To roll a Venus was a moment of pure ecstasy, a sign of divine favor that could empty the purses of everyone else at the table in a single, glorious moment. Other throws had their own names and values, creating a complex scoring system that players would have memorized as they placed their bets, the tension mounting with every rattle of the dice in the fritillus. The social atmosphere around these games was electric and pervasive. Taverns and street corners were filled with the sounds of players shouting their bets and groaning at unlucky rolls. Gambling was technically illegal for much of Rome's history, punishable by fines, but this did little to curb its wild popularity. The law was notoriously difficult to enforce, and it was common knowledge that people from all walks of life indulged. The Emperor Augustus was known to be a passionate dice player who would happily play and lose large sums of money with his friends, treating it as a relaxed social activity. This highlights a fascinating class divide in how the games were perceived. For the elite, it could be a sophisticated leisure pursuit, a way to demonstrate wealth and nonchalance. For the common person, it was a thrilling escape and a genuine, if risky, opportunity to improve their station, even if just for a day. This leads us to the powerful undercurrent of superstition that ran through every roll. Players weren't just relying on probability, they were appealing to the gods. They would whisper prayers to Fortuna or make small offerings before a game. They developed elaborate rituals, blowing on the dice for luck or using a favorite, supposedly lucky fritillus. The belief was that the outcome was influenced by divine will, that a moment of piety or a well-timed sacrifice could sway the goddess to smile upon them. This superstitious layer transformed a simple game of chance into a personal drama, a miniature spiritual quest where a player's fate hung on the turn of an animal bone. It was this potent mix of social excitement, financial risk, and divine intervention that made Roman dice games so endlessly captivating, proving that the desire to test one's luck against the universe is a timeless human impulse. While the clatter of dice in a tavern represented the thrill of adult gambling, there was another sound, just as common but far more innocent, that filled the courtyards and streets of Rome, the gentle clacking of knucklebones. This was the true game of the people, a pastime of astonishing simplicity that connected Roman children across vast social divides. The object itself was humble, an astragalus bone taken from the ankle of a sheep or goat. This little bone has a naturally peculiar, almost sculpted shape with 4 distinct, usable sides, 2 broad and rounded, and 2 narrow and flat. Its irregular form meant it couldn't roll like a modern die. When tossed, it would land with a satisfying clatter, settling decisively on one of its 4 faces. Each side was assigned a value, creating a natural, organic die that was both a plaything and a tool of fortune. The beauty of knucklebones lay in their versatility. In its simplest form, the game was one of pure physical skill, almost identical to the game of jacks played by children for centuries after. A child would toss a single bone into the air and, before catching it, had to swiftly scoop up a specific number of other bones from the ground. This required a steady hand, sharp eyes, and quick reflexes, turning a quiet corner into an arena of focused concentration and dexterity, but the bones could transform just as easily into instruments of chance. In a more complex game, a player would toss 5 knucklebones into the air from the palm of their hand, trying to catch as many as possible on the back of that same hand. The ones caught were then thrown again, and the goal was to pick up the remaining bones from the ground in a single motion before catching the one in the air. Each stage of the game had its own name and rules, creating a layered challenge that could occupy children for hours. Beyond these games of skill, the knucklebones served as dice for more intricate scoring games, where the different sides valued at 1, 3, 4, and 6 created a complex probability system. Players would take turns throwing a set of bones, with specific combinations earning points and special names, much like the coveted Venus throw with cubic dice. Throwing all 4 bones and having each land on a different value was the highest and most celebrated role. The clatter of the bones on a stone step and the subsequent cheer or groan of the players was a universal soundtrack to Roman childhood, a sound heard from the crowded apartments of the Subura to the spacious villas on the Palatine Hill. What's truly remarkable is how this simple toy transcended the rigid class structure of the ancient world. A child of an aristocratic senator and the son of a freedman baker could, and likely did, play the exact same game with the exact same object. For a wealthy child, the knucklebones might be exquisitely crafted from ivory, glass, or even semi-precious stones, intricately carved with miniature scenes or gilded with gold. These were luxury items, perhaps kept in a finely made wooden box. For the vast majority of children, however, the bones were just that, the actual cleaned bones from a butchered animal, polished smooth from years of play. This shared experience created a common cultural ground, a rare equality found in the palm of a child's hand. The game required no expensive board, no special equipment. It was accessible, portable, and endlessly engaging, a perfect democratic toy in a highly stratified society. The enduring legacy of the knucklebones is a testament to its perfect design. It was a toy that nurtured fine motor skills in the young, provided a framework for social interaction among friends, and even offered a gentle introduction to the concepts of chance and probability. It connected children not only to each other but also to the practical, agricultural world around them, turning a common byproduct of daily life into a source of endless amusement. In the simple asymmetrical shape of a sheep's ankle bone, we find one of the most profound and universal artifacts of Roman childhood, a reminder that the most powerful forms of play are often the most straightforward. While the strategic board games and games of chance reveal the Roman mind, to understand the Roman body in motion, we must look to the open courtyards and grassy fields where the sound of a bouncing ball was a common delight. The Romans didn't just play with balls, they celebrated them. The general term for their ball games was pila, and this wasn't a single uniform activity but a whole family of pastimes, each with its own unique equipment and style of play, offering everything from gentle recreation to intensely vigorous exercise. The variety started with the balls themselves, which were crafted from different materials for different purposes. The most common was the simple pila, a small, solid ball, often made from strips of leather tightly stitched together and stuffed with feathers, wool, or even cloth. This created a firm, dense ball that was perfect for fast-paced throwing and catching games that required a good, solid grip. Then there was the follies, a completely different kind of plaything. This was a larger ball, and the truly remarkable thing about it was that it was inflated with air. Roman texts describe the follies as being made from a pig's bladder, which was then encased in a protective leather shell. To imagine a Roman child bouncing an air-filled ball is to suddenly close a vast historical distance. The thump, thump, thump of a follies on a stone pavement is a sound that would be instantly familiar to any child today. There was even a third type, the paganica, a quirky hybrid ball stuffed with feathers, but also weighted with pieces of metal or lead sewn into its core. This oddity wasn't for a gentle game of catch, it was a training tool, its unpredictable, heavy flight path designed to build strength and improve a soldier's coordination under challenging conditions. What did you actually do with these balls? The Roman approach to ball games was less about organized team sports with goals and scores, and more about individual skill, fluid movement, and social interaction. One of the most popular games seems to have been a precursor to modern hacky sack or volleyball, where the objective was simply to keep the ball in the air for as long as possible, using any part of the body except the hands and feet. Players would form a circle and use their knees, shoulders, and heads to bounce the ball back and forth, a display of acrobatic agility and cooperative skill that required incredible timing and body control. Other games involved throwing and catching in complex sequences, sometimes while moving, similar to modern juggling. There were also more competitive throwing games where players would try to knock over targets or outthrow one another for distance. These activities were seen as the pinnacle of healthy recreation, promoting physical fitness, grace, and quick reflexes, all qualities admired in a Roman citizen. We don't have to rely solely on ancient texts to picture these lively scenes. The Romans left us a vivid visual record of their ball games in the stunning frescoes and mosaics that adorned their homes. In the Grand Villa of the Mysteries in Pompeii, a breathtaking fresco shows a young woman engaging in what appears to be a balancing act with a ball, her pose one of focused, dynamic grace. At the Baths of Caracalla in Rome, a detailed mosaic depicts two young men, stripped for exercise, intensely focused on a ball game, their bodies captured in mid-motion. These depictions aren't hidden away in obscure corners. They are prominent decorative features, suggesting that the sight of people playing with balls was a common, celebrated, and aesthetically pleasing part of daily Roman life. It was a symbol of youthful vitality and the Roman ideal of a sound mind and a sound body, but the significance of pila extended far beyond simple fun or fitness. For the Roman elite, ball games were a prescribed part of a daily health regimen, particularly at the public baths. A Roman gentleman would typically follow a sequence of a warm bath, a hot bath, and a cold plunge, and between these immersions, he would head to the exercise yard, the palestra, to work up a sweat. There, a game of catch or a session of keeping the follies aloft was considered the perfect moderate exercise to promote circulation and overall well-being. The physician Galen himself wrote extensively on the benefits of ball games, praising them as a form of exercise that engaged the entire body without the extreme exertion and danger of sports like wrestling or boxing. Therefore, the simple act of playing with a ball was woven into the very fabric of Roman culture, from the carefree games of children in the street to the health-conscious routines of adults at the baths, representing a universal appreciation for movement, play, and the joy found in a well-made sphere. But for those who truly wanted to test the limits of their coordination and reflexes, the ultimate ball game wasn't a gentle volley in a circle, it was the dizzying, high-speed challenge known as trigon. Picture this: 3 players, not 2, standing at the points of a triangle, each armed with a ball. This wasn't a turn-taking game, it was a continuous, simultaneous flurry of motion. The objective was deceptively simple: throw your ball to one opponent while simultaneously preparing to catch a ball incoming from the other. The reality was a chaotic and demanding test of mental and physical agility that would push even the most athletic among us to our limits. The true skill of trigon wasn't just in catching and throwing, but in the strategic way you threw the ball. The goal was to make your pass as difficult as possible for the intended receiver to handle. A player might put a deceptive spin on the ball, launch it with a sudden, unexpected speed, or aim it just slightly out of the opponent's comfortable reach. All of this had to be calculated in a split second, while another ball was already arcing toward you from a different direction. It was a game that required you to track 2 separate objects in your peripheral vision while executing a precise motor function, a neurological workout that modern sports scientists would applaud. There was no running or jumping. The challenge was confined to a small space, making it all about the quickness of the hands, the sharpness of the eyes, and the ability to remain calm under a literal bombardment of incoming objects. To truly grasp the difficulty, it helps to visualize it. Imagine a modern reenactment with 3 people in tunics standing a short distance apart. At a signal, the action begins, and instantly the air is filled with flying balls. You see a player snatch a red ball from the air with their left hand, and in the same fluid motion, their right arm is already whipping a green ball towards the person on their right. But before that green ball even reaches its target, a white ball is already closing in on them from the left, forcing a desperate, lunging catch. The pace is relentless, a juggling act where the pins are being thrown by other people. Drops and fumbles were not just common, they were the point. Every missed catch was a small victory for the thrower, a moment that highlighted a lapse in the opponent's concentration or a flaw in their technique. This was more than just a party game, it was a prestigious display of skill. Roman writers like Martial mentioned trigon in the context of the baths, where respected players, the trigonorii, would draw crowds of onlookers admiring their virtuoso performances. The game required a cool head and an ability to anticipate not just one move, but a chain of reactions unfolding around the triangle. It was a physical manifestation of the Roman appreciation for order amid chaos, a structured game that produced a whirlwind of action. In the swift, sharp exchanges of the trigon, we see the Roman ideal of the trained, disciplined body, capable of precise, reactive movements under pressure, a quality as valuable in the heat of a mock battle as it was in the heated competition of the palestra. Now let's shift our gaze from the complex coordination of trigon to a simpler, yet equally captivating sight on the Roman street, a child running alongside a whirling metal hoop, skillfully guiding its path with a single stick. This was the game of trochus or hoop rolling, and the distinctive clatter of metal on stone was as much a part of the city's soundscape as the cries of street vendors. At first glance, it seems like the most straightforward of amusements, a large hoop, often made of bronze or iron, and a sturdy wooden stick, usually with a hooked or forked end. The goal was simply to keep the hoop upright and moving forward by striking its lower edge with the stick, but to dismiss this as mere child's play is to miss the true depth of the challenge and the surprising sophistication the Romans brought to even this humble pastime. Controlling a trochus was a feat of fine-tuned skill and constant focus. The Roman streets were not the smooth, paved surfaces we might imagine. They were often uneven, with deep grooves from cartwheels, protruding stones, and unpredictable slopes. A hoop roller had to be in a state of perpetual motion and adjustment, using the stick not as a simple prod, but as a precise instrument of guidance. A gentle tap on the left side would correct a drift to the right. A firmer push was needed to propel it up a slight incline. It was a continuous dialogue between the child, the stick, and the wobbling hoop, a test of balance and hand-eye coordination that required the player to read the path ahead and react in an instant. For an expert, the hoop could be steered around obstacles, raced at impressive speeds, or even spun in complex patterns, transforming a simple run down the street into a dynamic performance of physical mastery. This wasn't just an activity for very young children. While younger kids certainly enjoyed it, classical writers like Horace and Martial specifically mentioned that trochus was a favorite pastime of older youths and even young men. It was seen as an excellent form of physical exercise, promoting agility, speed, and endurance. A long session of hoop rolling would provide a vigorous cardiovascular workout, strengthening the legs and arms as the player ran and steered. In a society that deeply valued physical fitness as a component of civic virtue, trochus was a recreational activity that seamlessly contributed to building a sound and capable body. Its appeal crossed social boundaries too. A fresco from Herculaneum, for instance, depicts a beautifully dressed young boy, clearly from a wealthy family, engrossed in playing with his hoop, suggesting it was a respected diversion even in aristocratic households. But the trochus reveals something else about the Roman character, their appreciation for quality and craftsmanship, even in their toys. These weren't crude circles of bent wood. Surviving examples and descriptions indicate they were often finely made metal hoops. Sometimes they were even engineered to create a distinctive and pleasant sound. Small metal rings or jingling pieces were occasionally attached to the inside of the hoop, so that as it rolled, it produced a whirring, rhythmic ring. a kind of auditory announcement of the player's approach. This added a sensory pleasure to the game and turned the rolling hoop into a moving spectacle of both sight and sound. The stick or clavis was also carefully fashioned, with its functional hook designed for maximum control and durability. This attention to detail shows that the Romans invested care in the objects of their play, viewing them not as disposable distractions, but as well-made tools for recreation and development. In the swift rolling motion of a bronze hoop, we see the Roman spirit in microcosm, a blend of practical utility, physical vigor, and an inherent drive to master the environment, one controlled, clattering revolution at a time. But for the girls of ancient Rome, the world of play often revived in the quiet heart of the home, centered around an object of profound personal significance, the doll. These were far more than simple playthings. They were companions, confidantes, and most importantly, powerful instructional tools. The most common type was the humble pupa, a rag doll lovingly crafted from scraps of linen or wool, stuffed with rags or straw. These dolls were often made by mothers or nurses, and their charm lay in their simplicity and the personal touch imbued in their creation. Remarkably, many of these cloth dolls were made with articulated limbs, jointed at the shoulders, hips, and sometimes even the knees, allowing a young girl to pose her companion, dress and undress it, and enact the scenes of daily life. These simple, soft figures were the constant companions of countless girls across the empire, their worn fabric and faint, hand-stitched faces bearing silent witness to hours of imaginative play. For the daughters of the elite, however, the experience of doll play was on an entirely different scale of opulence and realism. Archaeologists have uncovered dolls of breathtaking craftsmanship in the tombs of wealthy children, objects so fine they were clearly cherished possessions meant to accompany their owners into the afterlife. These were carved from ivory or bone with delicately rendered faces, slender limbs, and intricate details. The most striking feature of these luxury dolls is their hair, styled in the elaborate, towering coiffures that were the height of fashion for Roman matrons. These miniature masterpieces served as a direct link to the adult world of beauty and status, a three-dimensional fashion magazine for a young girl to study and emulate. This was not just a toy, it was a model of the woman she was expected to become, and the play didn't stop with the doll itself. We have evidence of complete domestic worlds created in miniature for these figures. Archaeological finds include tiny sets of furniture, miniature beds, stools, and even wooden cabinets alongside complete wardrobes of tiny tunics and stolas, little shoes, and astonishingly, sets of miniature jewelry including rings, bracelets, and necklaces. Some discoveries even include tiny cosmetic sets with miniature combs, mirrors, and pots for makeup and perfumes. Through this elaborate play, a Roman girl wasn't just passing the time, she was engaging in a comprehensive rehearsal for her future life. She was practicing how to dress elegantly, how to arrange her hair in the latest style, how to manage the layout of a bedroom, and how to care for her own precious belongings. It was a hands-on education in the aesthetics and responsibilities of a Roman matron, all conducted within the safe, private sphere of her own room. This contrast between the cloth pupa and the ivory doll is a powerful reflection of the rigid social hierarchy that defined Roman life. A girl from a poor family, playing with her stuffed cloth doll, was learning the same fundamental lessons of domesticity and motherhood as a senator's daughter. Yet the materials of their toys reinforced their vastly different stations. The rag doll was a symbol of resourcefulness and the practical realities of a life without excess. The ivory doll, on the other hand, was a clear symbol of wealth, status, and the specific, refined expectations placed upon women of the upper class. Both girls were being prepared for their roles as managers of a household, but the scope of that household, from a modest apartment to a sprawling villa with many slaves, was subtly mirrored in the quality and complexity of the toys they held in their hands. Beyond the intricate worlds of dolls and hoops, Roman children also possessed miniature versions of the empire's most powerful institutions, crafted in lead and terracotta. For a boy, a box of toy soldiers or millites was more than a collection of figures. It was his own personal legion, a command set that allowed him to recreate the great battles he heard about in stories and saw celebrated in public monuments. These weren't generic fighters, they were meticulously detailed to represent specific types of warriors. A typical set might include legionaries in segmented armor, carrying their distinctive rectangular shields, their poses fixed in the act of throwing a pilum or marching in formation. There were cavalrymen on their tiny horses, gladiators like the net-wielding Rhysirius locked in combat with a heavily armed secutor, and even enemy fighters like Gauls or Parthians, providing a clear us versus them narrative for the play. Cast from lead or molded from terracotta, these figures were surprisingly affordable, making the thrill of military command accessible to boys from a wide range of social backgrounds. Through arranging these miniature armies on a dirt floor, a Roman boy wasn't just fighting imaginary battles, he was internalizing the structure of the Roman military, learning unit names, tactical formations, and the very ideology of Roman military supremacy, all through the palms of his hands. This form of play was a direct and deliberate echo of the adult world's values. In a society where military glory was a primary path to fame and political power, these toys served as a constant, tangible reminder of a boy's ultimate destiny. The act of maneuvering his toy soldiers was a form of cognitive training, encouraging him to think like a commander, to consider terrain, unit placement, and the element of surprise. It fostered a competitive spirit and normalized the concept of organized violence as a tool of statecraft. Unlike the free-form play of ball games, this was structured, narrative-driven play that followed the script of Roman conquest. The stories he acted out with his millites were the same stories celebrated in triumphal processions through the city, linking his childhood amusement directly to the highest honors a Roman man could achieve. This was the ultimate socialization tool, transforming abstract concepts of duty, honor, and empire into a game that could be won or lost before supper. Meanwhile, rolling through the same households was another ubiquitous toy that transcended gender and reflected the economic engine of Rome itself, the model cart or plastellum. These were pull toys often made of terracotta or wood with clay wheels that actually turned on a fixed axle. They were frequently hitched to a team of miniature oxen, horses, or mules, also crafted from clay, creating a complete vignette of agricultural or commercial life. The appeal of these toys was universal. Both boys and girls would pull these little carts along, the clatter of their wheels mimicking the constant sound of traffic on Roman roads. For a child living in a bustling city or a quiet farmstead, the cart was a symbol of daily life. It was how goods reached the market, how building materials were transported, and how the harvest was brought in from the fields. Playing with a plastellum was an introduction to the fundamental logistics that held the Roman world together, yet the underlying lessons these carts taught were, once again, shaped by the rigid expectations of gender. For a boy, the toy cart was a precursor to the real wagons he might one day manage as part of his family's business or agricultural holdings. It was a playful introduction to trade, transport, and the management of resources, aligning with his future role as a provider and an active participant in the Roman economy. For a girl, the same toy often took on a more domestic meaning. She might use it in conjunction with her doll, perhaps as a vehicle for bringing supplies to her miniature household or for taking her doll on a journey. It reinforced her connection to the home and the management of the domestic sphere, where the arrival of goods and provisions was a key part of her future responsibilities as a matron. A single simple object could thus embody different facets of the same societal structure, preparing children for their distinct but interconnected paths in life. The humble pull toy, therefore, was not merely a distraction but a miniature classroom on wheels, conveying lessons about commerce, duty, and the division of labor with every trip across the atrium floor. Yet for all the crafted sophistication of ivory dolls and lead soldiers, some of the most cherished playthings in Rome required no workshop, no special purchase at all. They came from the kitchen pantry. Among the most surprising and universal toys were simple, everyday nuts, particularly walnuts. The generic term for these games was nooses, and a child's pocket might be filled with these hard, round treasures, each one a potential counter, a marble, or a token of luck. The humble walnut was not merely a snack, it was a versatile gaming piece, a symbol of chance, and a potent emblem of childhood itself. The games played with these nuts were delightfully simple and endlessly adaptable. One of the most popular was the iactus nooses, or the casting of nuts. This could take many forms, but a common version involved setting a single, larger nut or a small pottery bowl as a target. Children would then take turns tossing or rolling their walnuts from a set distance, trying to be the one to hit the target or land their nut closest to it. The player who succeeded would often win the nuts their opponents had lost in the round, turning a simple game of skill into a thrilling competition for a tangible prize. Another popular game was a primitive form of marbles, where players would use their fingers to flick one walnut in an attempt to strike others out of a designated circle drawn in the dust. The satisfying clack of nut against nut was the sound of victory, and a skilled player could amass quite a hoard by the end of the afternoon, their winnings jangling heavily in a pouch. This deep cultural connection between nuts and the world of children gave rise to one of the most poignant idioms in the Latin language. The phrase nusus relinquere, to give up one's nuts, was the Roman equivalent of saying someone had put away childish things. It was a symbolic gesture marking the transition to adulthood. For a boy, this often coincided with the ceremony where he exchanged his child's toga, the toga pretexted with its purple border, for the pure white toga virilis of a man. This was not just a change of clothing, it was a profound social and legal transformation. As part of this rite of passage, he would formally offer his childhood toys, including his collection of nuts, to the household gods, particularly to the god Apollo. This act was a solemn declaration that the time for games was over and the responsibilities of citizenship had begun. The poet Catullus beautifully captures this bittersweet moment, writing of a young man who, upon reaching maturity, surrenders his nuts to the gods and knows his childhood days are done. This symbolic meaning even infused the celebrations surrounding a wedding. At Roman marriages, it was a widespread custom for the groom to scatter walnuts among the children present at the ceremony. On one level, this was a simple act of generosity, a treat for the young guests, but on a deeper, more symbolic level, it was a powerful public announcement. By throwing these nuts to the children, the groom was visually and physically enacting his own nusus relinquere. He was demonstrating that he had left his own childhood behind and was now distributing his childish things to those who still belonged to that world. He was stepping into the full role of a husband and future head of a household, and the shower of nuts served as a playful yet deeply meaningful signal of his new adult status. So the next time you crack open a walnut, consider the small, profound history it carries. In its hard shell, Roman children saw a world of possibility, a game to be won, a skill to be mastered, a token of their fleeting youth. These simple organic objects connected them to each other and to the natural rhythm of life in a way that a manufactured toy sometimes could not. They were a reminder that the most powerful forms of play often spring from the simplest of materials, and that the journey from childhood to adulthood has always been marked by small, symbolic surrenders. Perhaps the most profound connection we can make with a Roman child isn't found in a museum case holding a delicate ivory doll or a set of lead soldiers, but in the simple, breathless thrill of the chase. Long before any complex rules for board games were written down, children were playing the most fundamental games of all, games that required nothing but their own bodies, a bit of open space, and a willing friend. The Romans had their own versions of the universal classics we know as hide and seek and tag, and the fact that they played them reminds us that the heart of childhood beats to a rhythm that transcends millennia. The Roman version of hide and seek was known as ludia abscondite, literally, to play at hiding. While we don't have a detailed rule book, references in poetry and everyday language paint a clear picture of the game's familiar contours. You can easily envision the scene in a bustling Roman home or a shaded courtyard. One child, the seeker, covers their eyes and begins to count aloud, while the others scatter, scrambling to find the perfect spot behind a large storage amphora, within the folds of a heavy curtain, or underneath a wooden cart. The tension of hiding, the suppressed giggle from a poorly chosen spot, and the triumphant cry of discovery were as real 2,000 years ago as they are in a backyard today. The Roman world, with its colonnaded walkways, cluttered workshops, and labyrinthine insulae apartments, offered a perfect, sprawling playground for this most basic of games. The game of chase, the ancient ancestor of tag, was just as prevalent, though it likely went by many simple, colloquial names. The core dynamic was undoubtedly the same. One child, it, would give chase and the others would flee, dodging and weaving through the spaces of their world. This wasn't just mindless running, it was a test of speed, agility, and cunning. A child would learn the topography of their neighborhood intimately, knowing which alley was a dead end and which merchant stall they could duck under for a quick escape. The game taught spatial awareness, quick reflexes, and the pure physical joy of movement. the shouts and laughter echoing from a city street or a country villa were a universal language of play, a sound that would be instantly recognizable to any child from any era. What seals this connection and proves these weren't just vague childhood amusements but recognized cultural fixtures is their appearance in the literature of the time. The poet Ovid, in his works, uses these games as metaphors precisely because they were so commonplace that every reader would immediately understand the reference. When he writes about the playful deceptions of lovers, he compares their evasions to the clever hiding in a game of ludo abscondite. He understood that the dynamic of seeking and finding, of pursuit and escape, was a fundamental human experience that began in childhood. By weaving these games into his poetry, he wasn't just being clever, he was tapping into a shared cultural memory, confirming that the experience of a Roman child counting down before a search was as deeply ingrained in their society as a game of hide and seek is in our own. This timelessness is the true magic of these games. A Roman child felt the same hammering heart when they found a perfect hiding spot that a child feels today. They knew the same giddy panic of being chased and the same triumphant exhilaration of a last-second dodge. No special equipment was needed, no social class defined who could play, and no elaborate rules were required to understand the objective. These games existed in the space before instructions, born from the fundamental human desires for excitement, social bonding, and physical play. They required no translation across cultures or centuries. In the shared, breathless laughter of a game of tag, the distance between their world and ours collapses completely, revealing a common thread of joy that connects every generation of children who have ever lived. Beyond the physical exertion of tag and the tactical thrill of board games, the air in Roman neighborhoods was often filled with another, more musical sound, the rhythmic chanting and synchronized clapping of children engaged in oral games. This was the auditory landscape of Roman childhood, a world of rhymes, rituals, and call and response chants that turned simple decisions into shared performances. While the specific words of their songs have been largely lost to time, the echoes of their plays still resonate through the writings of poets and satirists who observe the children around them. Horace, for instance, mentions children's delight in being free from school and joining together in games that surely involve the kind of chants familiar to any playground. His contemporary Persius also makes a passing reference to the playful taunts of children, giving us a precious, if fleeting, glimpse into this vibrant oral culture. Though we lack a complete Roman version of eeny, meeny, miny, mo, we can be confident that such counting out rhymes existed. The need to randomly and fairly select who would be it for a game of chase or hide and seek is a universal childhood problem, and the solution is almost always a rhythmic, nonsense chant that builds suspense before landing on a final, decisive syllable. In the absence of written records, we can reconstruct the atmosphere. Imagine a small group of children, perhaps on the steps of a bathhouse or in the dusty clearing of a field, standing in a circle. One child, with a solemn authority befitting a high priest, points a finger at each companion in turn, their voice rising and falling in a sing-song rhythm. The other children watch with bated breath, their bodies tense, waiting to see who the final word would condemn to the role of pursuer. The chant itself was likely a mix of real Latin words and playful, invented syllables, its primary purpose being rhythm and sound rather than literal meaning. This ritual transformed a simple selection process into a moment of shared drama and communal participation. The evidence suggests these chants weren't just for choosing players, they were also woven into the fabric of the games themselves. Singing games and clapping rhymes performed by pairs or circles of children would have been a common sight. These activities required precise coordination, matching the clap of a friend's hands on the correct beat while simultaneously reciting a memorized rhyme. This kind of play served multiple purposes. It was a fun social bonding exercise, it drilled rhythm and memory, and it developed fine motor skills and synchronization. The rhymes themselves might have contained snippets of adult life, mocking a stern teacher, parodying a politician's speech, or playfully referencing a popular gladiator. These chants were a way for children to process and play with the world they saw, creating their own folk culture that existed just below the radar of the adult world. We can also draw parallels from later European traditions to fill in the gaps. The enduring nature of childhood folklore means that the basic structures of these games are remarkably persistent. The call and response format, where one child sings a line and the rest answer in unison, creates a sense of community and collective identity. It's easy to picture Roman girls, much like children for centuries after, playing a game where they dance in a ring, their voices rising together in a chant about a mythical figure or a local legend, their feet moving in practiced steps that correspond to the lyrics. The very lack of surviving text is, in a way, proof of their authenticity. These rhymes lived in the moment, passed from an older sibling to a younger one, from one neighborhood to the next, constantly evolving and changing. They were not meant for scrolls or stone inscriptions. They were alive in the air, as fleeting and vibrant as the laughter that accompanied them. This oral tradition formed an invisible curriculum of the streets, teaching children about rhythm, language, cooperation, and the pure, unadulterated joy of making music together with nothing but their own voices and hands. But even with all these daily games, the Roman calendar held special times when play wasn't just tolerated, it was officially encouraged. On certain holidays, the entire social order shifted, creating designated windows where children's activities moved from the periphery to the very center of public life. The most spectacular example of this was the Saturnalia, a festival in December that turned the Roman world upside down. For several days, the rigid hierarchies that governed society were suspended. Masters would serve meals to their slaves, and children were granted an extraordinary degree of freedom and license. The normal rules of deference and discipline were relaxed, and the atmosphere was one of carnivalesque revelry. For a Roman child, this was a magical interlude where they could speak more freely, make playful demands of their parents, and engage in boisterous behavior that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. This sanctioned inversion served a vital social purpose, acting as a pressure valve that released the built-up tensions of a highly structured society, and children were active, joyous participants in this temporary upheaval. The connection between the Saturnalia and children's play was deeply symbolic. A common feature of the festival was gambling, especially with dice and knucklebones. What was illegal or frowned upon for most of the year was not only permitted during Saturnalia, but was actively embraced by all ages. Children would join adults in games of chance, the rattle of dice echoing through homes and public spaces alike. This was more than just fun, it was a lesson in the whims of fortune, a core Roman concept. By allowing children to gamble during this time, society was giving them a controlled taste of risk and random chance, mirroring the festival's overarching theme that fate could overturn the established order at any moment. The gifts exchanged during Saturnalia, known as sigularia, often included toys like dolls, figurines, and noisemakers, further cementing the holiday's identity as a celebration focused on the young and the spirit of play. While the Saturnalia was a blanket celebration of misrule, other festivals had a more targeted focus on the younger generation. One such event was the Mediterranealia, observed on the 11th of October. This was a wine festival dedicated to tasting and blessing the new vintage, but its rituals directly involved the youth of Rome. Ancient sources describe how on this day, young people would perform a specific ritual. They would taste both the new wine and the old wine from the previous year, and while doing so, they would recite a charm or a playful chant, often translated as, "I drink the new and the old wine, I heal new and old diseases." This act was a form of sympathetic magic meant to ensure health for the coming year. Following this ritual, the day would often dissolve into games and playful competitions among the youth. The Mediterranealia showcases how play and ritual were often intertwined in the Roman world. The games that followed the wine tasting weren't random, they were a structured part of the holiday's expression. You can imagine groups of older children and teenagers, having participated in this important agricultural rite, now engaging in foot races, ball games, or mock contests of strength in the fields. Their play was a physical extension of the festival's purpose, a celebration of vitality, health, and the fruitful bounty of the land. It provided a socially approved channel for youthful energy, linking their exuberance directly to the community's well-being and the cycles of nature. In this way, their fun was not separate from the sacred, it was an integral component of it. These periodic festivals provided a crucial rhythm to a Roman child's year. Life was not an endless grind of study and duty. It was punctuated by these bright, anticipated intervals where play was not just allowed, but mandated by tradition and religion. The Saturnalia offered a cathartic release from social constraints, while the Mediterranean connected youthful play to the health of the community and the land. These were not mere breaks from normal life, they were structured times for intense, meaningful play that reinforced social bonds, taught cultural values about inversion and renewal, and gave children a powerful sense of belonging to the larger cycles of Roman time. The laughter that filled the streets during these holidays was a sanctioned and essential sound, proof that the Romans understood the need to periodically set the serious business of empire aside and let the games begin. But this vibrant world of hoops, dolls, and board games had a far more aggressive and unsettling undercurrent, one that reveals how the empire's pervasive culture of militarism and public violence seeped into the lives of its youngest citizens. For Roman boys, particularly those born into influential patrician families destined for leadership, play could be a brutal training ground, a deliberate rehearsal for the battlefield. It was not uncommon to see groups of youths in the fields outside the city or in the spacious courtyards of grand villas, engaged in organized mock battles known as ludus militaris. These weren't chaotic scuffles, they were structured drills supervised by fathers or a trusted slave pedagogue who acted as a drill instructor. The boys would be divided into two sides, each armed with child-sized wooden swords, the rudis and lightweight wicker shields modeled after the legionaries' curved scutum. They practiced basic formations, learning to advance in a line, hold their shield wall, and thrust with their wooden blades, all while wearing small, practice helmets. The objective was to instill muscle memory and a fundamental understanding of unit cohesion, the very bedrock of Roman military success. A stumble or a dropped shield might earn a sharp reprimand, teaching them that even in play, discipline was paramount and failure had consequences. This militaristic play reached its most disturbing extreme, however, in the grim pastime of playing Gladiator. Fueled by the colossal popularity of the actual games in the amphitheater, children, and sometimes shockingly young ones, would enthusiastically reenact the bloody duels they witnessed. They didn't just pretend, they often used real, albeit blunted, weapons. Archaeologists have uncovered small, purpose-made gladiator helmets for children, crafted from bronze or iron, as well as miniature sets of armor. These were not crude toys, they were functional, scaled-down replicas of the gear worn by professional fighters in the arena. A boy might take on the role of a Retiarius, the net and trident fighter, armed with a small, harmless net and a fork with blunted tines, while his friend would play the secutor, the pursuer, wielding a wooden sword and a small, rounded shield. The goal was to mimic the dramatic, often fatal, conclusion of a real gladiatorial combat, with one child dramatically dying on the grassy floor of the garden after a theatrical final blow. What makes this so jarring to our modern sensibilities is the intensity with which these games were sometimes taken. Roman writers and moralists occasionally expressed alarm at the passion children displayed for these violent recreations. The poet Juvenal, in one of his famous satires, laments how a boy would rather be a gladiator than a scholar, practicing with his little sword and shield with a deadly seriousness. There are accounts, though likely exaggerated for rhetorical effect, of these play fights escalating, of tempers flaring when a child refused to die properly, leading to real scuffles and injuries. This blurring of the line between play and genuine aggression was part of the point. The culture was not shielding its children from violence, it was immersing them in it, acclimatizing them to the sight of combat and the idea of inflicting and receiving pain as a form of public entertainment and a demonstration of courage. The games were a direct reflection of the values celebrated in the adult world, where martial prowess and the ability to withstand suffering were virtues, and where the spectacle of death in the arena was a core part of civic life. This grooming for brutality was deeply intertwined with social class. For a boy from a patrician family, these war games were a fundamental part of his curriculum, preparing him for a future role as a military tribune or a legate commanding legions. His wooden sword was a precursor to the real gladius he was expected to wield. For children from poorer families or even slave children, the implications were different. They might be forced to participate as the enemy or the vanquished gladiator in the games of wealthier boys, reinforcing social hierarchies and the power dynamic of conqueror and conquered from a terrifyingly young age. The play was a microcosm of the empire itself, organized, hierarchical, competitive, and fundamentally brutal. It taught Roman boys that their world was one of constant competition and potential conflict, where victory was celebrated and defeat was a spectacle. In the echoing clash of their wooden swords, we hear the ominous prelude to the marching legions and the roaring crowds of the Colosseum, a chilling reminder that in Rome, even a child's imagination was a territory to be conquered and disciplined for the grim realities of adult life. But what does this world of play actually look like when we hold it in our hands? History can sometimes feel distant and abstract, but the objects these children left behind collapse the centuries in an instant. Archaeology gives us the privilege of taking that virtual tour, of walking through the silent halls of museums and seeing the very toys a Roman child cherished, offering us a connection that feels almost personal. One of the most touching and complete discoveries comes not from a grand Italian villa, but from the damp soil of Roman Londinium. Here, archaeologists uncovered a simple wooden doll. She isn't a fancy ivory figurine, she is a humble creation, her form carved from a single piece of wood, her features worn soft by countless loving touches. But the true magic of this find was what lay beside her, a tiny wooden box, and inside a complete, meticulously crafted wardrobe. There were little tunics, a small cloak, and even miniature shoes, all made from scraps of linen and leather. This wasn't just a toy, it was a life in miniature. We can so easily picture a young girl in a chilly British province, sitting by the hearthlight, carefully dressing and undressing her wooden companion, practicing for a future she would one day manage, her imagination warming a room far from the sun of the Mediterranean. This doll and her trousseau speak of a universal childhood experience, the need for a companion, a confidante, but they also ground that experience in the specific, practical reality of a Roman girl's domestic education. For a sense of communal, street-level fun, we need to travel to Pompeii, where the volcanic ash of Mount Vesuvius froze a moment in time with unparalleled clarity. In the ruins of a modest home, a small, lidded pottery box was found. When archaeologists carefully lifted the lid, they discovered not jewels or coins, but a collection of astragalloi, or knucklebones. There were over 50 of them gathered together, their surfaces smooth from constant use. This was a child's treasure chest. We can imagine a group of siblings or friends gathered in the courtyard of this very house, taking turns tossing the bones, their laughter echoing off the walls before being silenced forever. The fact that they were kept in a special box tells us they were valued, a prized gaming set always ready for a quick round of skill or chance. This simple find is a powerful democratizer. It reminds us that the most common and beloved pastimes required no great wealth. The child who owned this collection could have been the son of a baker or a shopkeeper, and his game was identical to one played by the child of a senator. In these little bones, we find the great equalizer of childhood, the shared language of play, and then there are the games etched into the very fabric of the city itself. You don't need to go to a museum to see this evidence. You can walk through the Roman Forum and see it under your feet. Carved into the steps of the Basilica Julia, a grand courthouse and public meeting space, are intricate grids for playing board games. These are not crude scratches, they are carefully inscribed playing boards for games like calculi and Latrunculi, permanently etched into the marble by generations of Romans. Picture a merchant waiting for a court case to be called, or a politician with a spare moment between meetings, or even a servant on an errand, crouching down for a quick, impromptu game with a friend. They would use a handful of pebbles or pieces of pottery as their counters, and for a few minutes, the grand politics of the empire would fade away, replaced by the tactical challenge of surrounding an opponent's piece. These carved boards are a public diary of Roman life, proving that the urge for a mental challenge, for a moment of focused competition, was woven into the daily rhythm of the city, from the most powerful to the most humble. Each of these artifacts is a direct message from the past. The wooden doll from London whispers about the private, domestic world of girls and the quiet rehearsal for adulthood. The box of knucklebones from Pompeii shouts with the boisterous, communal energy of street games and friendships. The game boards carved into the steps of the Basilica speak of a society that integrated play into its public spaces, where strategy and chance were part of the civic landscape. There are more than just objects, they are conduits. When we look at them, we are not just studying history, we are meeting the children themselves. We see the small hands that dressed that doll, the quick fingers that tossed those bones, the focused minds that plotted moves on those stone boards. These toys are the untold stories of the Roman Empire, reminding us that beneath the legions and the emperors, there was always the sound of children at play. The games Roman children played were never a simple matter of preference or chance. They were a meticulously designed curriculum for life, and at the heart of this curriculum lay a profound and unyielding gender divide. From their earliest years, boys and girls were funneled into entirely separate worlds of play, each world carefully constructed to mold them into the specific type of adult Roman society demanded. This separation wasn't a subtle suggestion, it was the very framework of their childhood, a deliberate and powerful form of social conditioning that reinforced their destined paths with every toss of a ball and every adjustment of a doll's tunic. For a Roman boy, the overarching goal of his play was to forge a citizen soldier, a man capable of both commanding legions and debating in the forum. Consequently, his games were a relentless training ground in competition, strategy, and physical aggression. Take the beloved ball games, for instance. While they offered fun, their primary purpose for boys was to develop the physical virtues of a warrior. The fierce team-based field hockey game cultivated strength, endurance, and a tolerance for pain. The high-speed, multitasking demands of Trigon were not just for show. They sharpened the quick reflexes, strategic thinking, and ability to remain calm under pressure that were essential for an officer on a chaotic battlefield. Even his toy box was an armory in miniature. His collection of lead legionaries and gladiators wasn't for passive display, it was for enacting elaborate conquests and sieges on the floor of the atrium. In maneuvering these tiny armies, he wasn't just playing war, he was internalizing the logic of Roman military tactics, the hierarchy of the legions, and the ideology of expansion and dominance. His wooden practice sword, the rudis, was a direct and heavy symbol, its weight in his hand a constant reminder of the real gladius he was expected to wield. Through this play, he learned that his world was one of hierarchy and conquest, where victory was celebrated and defeat was a lesson in resilience. His recreation was a continuous, active rehearsal for a life of public competition and martial command. In stark contrast, the world of a Roman girl was circumscribed by the walls of the home. The domus, and her play was a quiet, intensive preparation for her role as its heart. Her most significant toy was her doll, but this was no idle amusement. A girl's doll, whether a simple stuffed cloth pupa or an exquisitely carved ivory figure, was a proxy for her future self. The act of dressing it in tiny tunics, arranging its hair in the latest matronly fashion, and caring for it was a direct rehearsal for the duties of motherhood and self-presentation. This domestic training extended far beyond the doll itself. The miniature furniture, the sets of tiny pottery, and the incredibly detailed little jewelry boxes found by archaeologists were not mere accessories, they were the tools of a practical education. By managing this miniature household, a girl learned the spatial and organizational logic of a Roman home. She practiced the rituals of care and management that would one day define her status and effectiveness as a matron. Her games were solitary or cooperative with other girls, focused inward on the private sphere, cultivating the virtues of nurturing, order, and beauty, all essential qualities for a woman whose power and influence were meant to be exercised from within the household, not in the public eye. This divide was not an organic development, it was a conscious and deliberate project enforced by parents, nurses, and pedagogues. A boy who showed too much interest in dolls might be gently, or not so gently, steered toward his wooden sword. A girl who displayed overly aggressive, competitive behavior was likely corrected and reminded of the modesty expected of her. The Roman philosopher Musonius Rufus, while advocating for the education of girls, still firmly stated that their learning should be directed toward managing a household and raising children, reflecting the societal consensus on separate spheres. The toys given as gifts during festivals like the Saturnalia reinforced this divide. A boy could expect a set of soldiers or a new ball, while a girl received a doll or a new piece for her miniature trousseau. This constant material reinforcement ensured that from their earliest conscious moments, children understood the script they were meant to follow, and play was the most engaging and persuasive rehearsal for those roles. Ultimately, this stark separation in play reveals the core machinery of Roman social reproduction. The empire's stability relied on a steady supply of men willing to fight and govern, and women capable of maintaining the domestic order that allowed them to do so. The laughter of children at play masked the serious business of molding them into the specific cogs needed to keep the vast imperial machine functioning. In the boy's triumphant cry as he captured his friend's piece in Latrunculi, we hear the echo of a future general's strategy. In the girl's quiet concentration as she arranged her doll's tiny jewelry, we see the focus of a future matron overseeing her family's wealth and legacy. Their games were a powerful, invisible curriculum, teaching them not just what to do, but fundamentally who they were meant to be. Yet even within this world of carefully gendered toys, the single greatest determinant of a Roman child's daily reality wasn't whether they were a boy or a girl, but the social class they were born into. The experience of play was not a universal right of childhood, but a privilege sharply stratified by wealth and status, painting two dramatically different pictures of youth in the ancient world. For the vast majority of children, the sons and daughters of plebeians, freedmen, and the urban poor, play was a spontaneous, improvised affair, carved out of the margins of a life often shadowed by labor and necessity. Their toys were born from the world around them, fashioned from whatever materials were cheap, discarded, or free. A simple rag doll, a pupa, might be stitched together by a mother from leftover scraps of linen, its face embroidered with a few careful threads, its body stuffed with straw or wool clippings. Its value lay not in its craftsmanship, but in the love imbued in its making, a humble companion for a girl whose future likely involved helping her mother with weaving, tending a market stall, or caring for younger siblings. For these children, a collection of knucklebones wasn't a curated set in a box. It was a handful of actual sheep bones scavenged from a butcher's refuse, polished smooth by countless hours of play in the dust of a courtyard or a crowded street. These were toys of resilience and imagination, where the real luxury was the fleeting time to enjoy them between chores and errands. Step into the home of a wealthy patrician family, however, and the landscape of play transformed into one of opulence and explicit instruction. Here, a girl's doll was not a cloth effigy, but a masterpiece of miniature sculpture, crafted from ivory or exotic woods, with articulated joints and a face painted in delicate pigments. It was a direct reflection of her family's status. These dolls were often coiffed in the most current, elaborate hairstyles of the imperial court, serving as a walking fashion plate for a girl being groomed to navigate high society. Her play was not confined to a single doll. It was supported by an entire ecosystem of miniatures, tiny silver mirrors, miniature bronze furniture, and wardrobes of silk and fine wool, all designed to offer a hyper-realistic rehearsal for managing a vast and prosperous household. For an aristocratic boy, the lead soldiers he commanded were not generic figures but detailed replicas of specific legionary types, perhaps a gift from a father returned from a military posting in Germania or Syria. His board games were not scratched into the pavement but played on finely crafted wooden tabulae inlaid with mother of pearl, using counters made of polished gemstones or colored glass. Every object in his playroom was a tangible lesson in taste, power, and the material culture of the elite. This disparity extended to the most exotic and ostentatious of childhood possessions, live animals. While a plebeian child might have a loyal dog or a cat to follow them through the streets, an aristocratic child could be given a pet that was a blatant symbol of Rome's far-reaching imperial power. Exotic birds in gilded cages, small Mediterranean monkeys dressed in tiny costumes, and even fawns or other tame forest creatures were not uncommon in the gardens of the wealthy. The poet Martial writes with a mix of amusement and pathos about the death of a young girl's pet parrot, a bird that would have been a costly import from distant lands, highlighting how such creatures were both beloved companions and living trophies of economic and political reach. This wasn't just pet ownership, it was a display of dominion over the natural world, a daily reminder to the child that their family's influence stretched to the very edges of the known world. But the most stark and sobering contrast lies in the experience of slave children. For them, the modern concept of a carefree childhood dedicated to play was largely non-existent. From the moment they could walk and follow simple instructions, their lives were interwoven with labor. A young slave in a wealthy household might be assigned as a personal attendant, a pet aisquis to a patrician child of similar age. Their play was often an extension of their servitude, forced to participate in the games of their young master or mistress, always in the subservient role. They would be the captive Gaul to the Roman general's triumphant legions, the vanquished gladiator who had to die convincingly under the wooden sword of the young Dominus, or the patient playmate who held the doll while the young Matrona selected its clothes. Any play they engaged in for their own sake was likely imitative of the adult work they witnessed every day, perhaps using a handful of pebbles to measure out grain like a merchant or mimicking the rhythmic sweeping of the floor with a small stick. Their games were a reflection of a world where their own autonomy was the first and most fundamental thing denied to them, a poignant form of play that prepared them for nothing but a life of continued servitude. This vast chasm between the play of the rich and the poor, the free and the enslaved, reveals a core truth about Roman society. Childhood itself was a luxury. The abundance and quality of a child's toys were a direct indicator of their family's place in the rigid social hierarchy. For the plebeian majority, play was a fleeting respite, a burst of joyful noise in a life of material simplicity. For the aristocracy, it was an extension of their curriculum for leadership, a world of sophisticated tools designed to reproduce their class's values and privileges in the next generation. And for the slave, any moment of playful imagination was a small, hard-won victory against a system that sought to define them solely by their utility. In the end, the toys of ancient Rome do more than just tell us what children did for fun. They offer us a powerful lens through which to see the profound and often painful inequalities that structured every aspect of the Roman world, from the Senate house down to the very games children played in the street. While the bustling streets and domestic courtyards provided one kind of playground for many Roman children, the ultimate freedom was found not in the man-made city, but just beyond its walls in the flowing, sometimes treacherous, waters of the Tiber River. On hot summer days, the banks of the Tiber would have been a magnet for the city's youth, a natural escape from the dust and crowds where the rules of the urban world seemed to dissolve into the current. Swimming wasn't just a leisurely pastime for these children. It was a fundamental and necessary skill, a form of play that was deeply intertwined with survival, commerce, and the raw, untamed power of nature that flowed through the very heart of the empire. The Romans, being an intensely practical people, viewed swimming as a core component of a proper education, especially for boys. The historian Plutarch explicitly lists it as one of the essential skills every child should learn, right alongside reading and writing. For the children of fishermen, boatmen, and merchants who worked along the river, this was a matter of daily life and death. Knowing how to navigate the currents could mean the difference between a successful haul and a tragic accident. But even for children who had no professional connection to the water, the ability to swim was seen as a mark of a well-rounded citizen. It built physical strength, endurance, and courage, all virtues prized in the Roman character. Fathers would take their sons to the river to teach them, and groups of boys would learn together, their shouts and splashes echoing along the muddy banks, turning a vital lesson into a lively social event. Once the basic skill was mastered, the real fun began. We can easily imagine the lively scenes, groups of children challenging each other to races across the river's width, their arms churning through the water as they vied to be the first to touch the far bank. The popular game of tag, so common on land, would have taken on a thrilling new dimension in the water, becoming a slippery, splashing pursuit where a quick dive could provide the perfect escape. They likely engaged in playful wrestling matches, testing their strength and buoyancy, and practiced daring dives from overhanging branches or from the small skiffs that crowded the river. The water was a great equalizer in these moments. The son of a senator and the son of a freedman could compete on a nearly level playing field, their social status washed away by the river, if only for an afternoon. But this idyllic picture of aquatic fun had a much darker, more dangerous side. Ancient writers did not speak of the Tiber as a gentle, placid stream. They described it as a powerful, moody, and often deadly force. The poet Horace refers to its yellow waters, stained with silt, and the historian Livy recounts several dramatic instances where the river flooded its banks with devastating effect. The current could be surprisingly strong and unpredictable, with hidden undertows that could easily overpower even a competent young swimmer. There were no lifeguards, no safety ropes, and the riverbed itself was littered with hazards, sunken debris, broken pottery, and the slippery stones that made footing treacherous. Every joyful plunge into the cool water carried with it a very real and acknowledged risk. A parent's warning about the river's dangers was not an empty threat, but a sober recognition of a genuine peril that claimed lives with tragic regularity. This element of risk adds a profound layer to our understanding of Roman childhood. For modern parents, the idea of allowing young children to play unsupervised in a powerful, unpredictable river seems unthinkably reckless. But in the ancient world, a certain level of danger was an accepted part of daily life. Children were expected to develop resilience and self-reliance through direct experience with their environment, and that environment was often harsh. Playing in the Tiber was a way to confront and master that harshness. It taught them to read the water's mood, to respect its power, and to rely on their own strength and wits to survive. This wasn't negligence, it was a different philosophy of upbringing, one that prepared them for a world where life was frequently precarious and where courage was not an abstract concept, but a necessary tool for navigating the world's inherent dangers. The laughter that rang out from the Tiber's banks was therefore tinged with a sobering reality, a reminder that for Roman children, even their moments of greatest freedom were a lesson in the delicate balance between joyous play and the ever-present shadow of fate. Beyond the simple toys and organized games, one of the most cherished and relatable relationships in a Roman child's life was the bond they shared with their pets. In a world without manufactured entertainment, animals provided constant companionship, unconditional affection, and a living, breathing focus for a child's nurturing instincts. For most Roman families, the quintessential pet was the dog. These weren't just guard animals, they were loyal friends. Mosaics and frescoes from Pompeii and Herculaneum repeatedly show small, lively dogs, often of a breed similar to a modern Italian greyhound, curled up under dining couches or playfully following children. One famous mosaic from the house of the tragic poet in Pompeii bears the iconic warning, "Cave Canem, beware of the dog," but the animal depicted is a small, spotted creature, tethered more for show than for any genuine threat, the kind of dog a child might have sneakily untied for a romp through the garden. Writers like Virgil and Ovid reference dogs by name, praising their loyalty and companionship, suggesting these animals were considered true members of the household. We can easily picture a Roman boy, his wooden sword abandoned for a moment, racing his furry companion across the courtyard, or a young girl secretly sharing a scrap of bread with her four-legged confidante. The dog was a fixture of domestic life, a playmate who asked for nothing more than attention and offered unwavering devotion in return. Cats too had their place in the Roman home, though their role was more complex and often tied to their practical purpose as pest control. The Romans are credited with introducing the domestic cat to much of Europe from Egypt, where cats were revered. In a Roman context, they were valued for keeping homes and grain stores free of mice and rats. Yet their independent nature also captured the Roman imagination. A charming fresco from Herculaneum shows a seated cat, its posture relaxed and familiar, very much at home. For a child, a cat's playful, unpredictable antics, pouncing on a stray leaf or chasing a ball of yarn, would have been a source of endless fascination. While perhaps not as overtly affectionate as a dog, a cat's presence offered a different kind of companionship, one based on quiet observation and the simple comfort of a warm, purring creature curled in a sunbeam. Birds were another incredibly popular choice, especially for those living in the crowded city. Cages containing colorful finches, talkative parrots, or melodious nightingales were common features in Roman homes. The poet Martial wrote a touching epitaph for a young girl named Stella and her pet dove, which she taught to eat from her hand and perch on her shoulder, a poignant image of a tender bond between a child and a creature she cared for. The daily rituals of feeding a bird, cleaning its cage, and listening to its song provided a gentle, routine form of play and responsibility. For the children of the elite, however, the animal kingdom offered far more exotic and ostentatious companions, creatures that served as living symbols of their family's wealth and global reach. It was not uncommon for wealthy patricians to import exotic animals specifically as pets for their children. Small, agile monkeys from North Africa, dressed in tiny costumes, were a particular status symbol. These intelligent and mischievous animals would have been a source of both delight and chaos, their antics providing a unique form of entertainment that a simple wooden toy could never match. The poet Statius describes a young boy playing with his pet gazelle, a graceful and delicate creature that would have required immense resources to acquire and keep healthy in an urban setting. Such a pet was a walking testament to the family's extensive trade connections, and their ability to tame a piece of the wild frontier for their private amusement. For these aristocratic children, their pets were not just friends, they were extensions of their family's power, living lessons in empire and dominion. Playing with a monkey or walking a gazelle on a leash was a powerful, daily reminder of their privileged place in a world where Rome commanded everything from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania. Yet one of the most peculiar and controversial Roman pet-keeping practices involved a creature we would never consider today, the dormouse. These small, hibernating rodents were not merely tolerated, they were actively cultivated as pets and, paradoxically, also raised as a gourmet delicacy for wealthy banquets. The evidence for this comes from a unique archaeological find, the glorarium. This was a special terracotta jar, often rounded or cylindrical, with internal spirals or ridges running along its inner walls and small air holes punched near the top. The design was ingenious and unsettling. Dormice would be placed inside the jar, where they would instinctively run along the ridges, getting exercise but unable to escape. They were fattened on a diet of nuts, chestnuts, and acorns, making them plump for the table. However, it is highly plausible that for many Roman children, these captive dormice also became temporary pets. A child might sneak to the glorarium to watch the small, busy creatures scurrying about, perhaps even feeding them a special nut by hand. This creates a deeply conflicting image for the modern viewer. The same animal that was a child's secret playmate could later become a culinary treat. This practice blurs our comfortable line between pet and livestock, forcing us to confront the different cultural context in which Roman children lived, where the relationship with animals was often more pragmatic and less sentimentalized. The presence of these animals, from the humble dog to the exotic monkey, completes our picture of Roman childhood, adding a layer of emotional richness that toys alone cannot provide. A pet offered a unique form of solace and unconditional acceptance in a society that placed heavy demands on its children to conform to rigid social roles. When a boy was chastised for failing a lesson with his pedagogue, he could find comfort in the non-judgmental nuzzle of his dog. When a girl felt constrained by the endless rehearsals of domestic life with her doll, she could find a sense of freedom in the cheerful song of her caged finch. These animals were silent witnesses to the private triumphs and sorrows of youth, their simple needs providing a consistent and grounding routine. The archaeological evidence of pet burials, with small skeletons carefully laid to rest in coffins, sometimes with a favorite toy or a collar, tells a powerful story of love and loss that transcends time. In these final, respectful acts, we see that the bond between a Roman child and their animal companion was as real, as deep, and as meaningful as any we understand today, revealing the timeless, universal need for a loyal friend. But if you thought all Roman games were about quiet strategy or practicing for the future, think again. Among the shouts and laughter at a family gathering or a public festival, you would almost certainly have heard the chaotic, joyful sounds of a game that we still know today, though by a different name. The Romans played a version of blind man's bluff, a raucous guessing game they likely inherited from the Greeks, who called it meinda. This was a game of pure, unadulterated fun, a test of senses and stealth that stripped away social pretense and filled a room with energy and suspense. The rules were beautifully simple, yet they created a whirlwind of activity. One player would be chosen as the seeker, and their eyes would be securely covered with a thick cloth, plunging their world into darkness. The other players would then scatter around the designated play area, which could be a spacious atrium, a grassy field, or a cleared space in a garden. The blindfolded player's task was to grope, listen, and stumble their way through the space, arms outstretched, trying to capture one of the taunting, elusive figures dancing just out of reach. The true heart of the game, however, wasn't just the chase, it was the chorus of voices. The other players weren't supposed to stay silent. In fact, their role was to actively tease and misdirect the blindfolded seeker. They would call out the seeker's name, clap their hands, or make playful insults, all while deftly sidestepping any groping hands. A player might daringly sneak up from behind to tap the seeker on the shoulder, only to leap back with a laugh as the seeker spun around wildly. This created a dynamic, swirling chaos where sound was both a guide and a trap. The seeker had to filter the cacophony, trying to distinguish the direction of a genuine voice from an echo off a courtyard wall, or a clever feint from a particularly mischievous friend. It was a game that demanded acute hearing, sudden bursts of speed, and a healthy sense of humor, because the spectacle of a respected older sibling or a dignified friend stumbling about in confusion was a large part of the amusement for everyone watching. Once the blindfolded player finally managed to corner and lay hands on someone, the game wasn't over. The captured player had to stand still, and the seeker would then have to correctly identify them by touch alone. This is where the game became intensely personal and tactile. The seeker's fingers would trace the contours of a face, feel the texture of hair, perhaps recognize the weave of a familiar tunic or the shape of a piece of jewelry. In a world without electric light, where many social interactions happened in dimly lit spaces, this ability to recognize people by touch was a more commonplace skill than it is today. A successful identification meant the captured player would then take their turn under the blindfold, and the merry chaos would begin anew. A wrong guess, however, was met with gales of laughter from the onlookers, and the embarrassed seeker would have to release their captive and continue the hunt, the cloth still tied firmly over their eyes. We can easily picture this game as a centerpiece of a lively Saturnalia celebration, where social norms were inverted and laughter was the order of the day. Imagine a grand villa, its main hall filled with the extended family and their guests. A respected uncle, perhaps a little tipsy on wine, is blindfolded and spun around. His nephews and nieces, along with the household slaves who were temporarily empowered by the holiday spirit, would dart around him, their voices a mixture of respect and playful mockery. The scene would be one of shared joy that temporarily erased the usual hierarchies, a moment where everyone, regardless of age or status, was united in the simple, universal language of play. The game required no equipment beyond a simple piece of cloth, making it accessible to everyone from the wealthiest patrician to the most humble family. Its enduring appeal from the Roman Maeinda to the playgrounds of today lies in this perfect combination of suspense, physical comedy, and social bonding, proving that some forms of fun are truly timeless. For all the laughter and games, Roman childhood was never meant to last. This vibrant world of spinning hoops and treasured dolls was designed with a clear expiration date, a societal boundary that every child knew they would one day cross. The transition to adulthood wasn't a gradual shift, it was a definitive, often abrupt, ceremonial line in the sand, marked by powerful rituals that publicly and permanently separated the world of play from the world of duty. For boys and girls, this passage looked dramatically different, yet both were governed by the same underlying principle. The individual's identity was now fully subsumed by their utility to the family and the state, and the toys of youth had to be formally left behind. The most significant and public rite of passage for a Roman boy was the Liberalia, a festival held on the 17th of March in honor of Liber Pater, a god of fertility and growth. This was the day a young man, typically around the age of 16, would shed the outward symbols of his childhood and step into his identity as a full citizen. The ceremony was rich with symbolism, beginning within the privacy of his home. There he would carefully remove two of his most personal possessions. The first was his toga praetexta, the simple white toga with a distinctive purple border that marked him as a child. The second, and perhaps more emotionally significant, was his bulla. This was a small, hollow locket, usually made of gold for the wealthy or simple leather for poorer families, which he had worn around his neck since the day he was named. It contained protective amulets and was believed to ward off evil spirits. From infancy through all his scraped knees and playground triumphs, the bulla had been a constant physical presence, a tangible shield provided by his family. To take it off was to symbolically declare that he no longer needed its protection, that he was now ready to face the dangers and responsibilities of the world on his own merits. This private moment was just the prelude to a very public spectacle. Dressed in a simple tunic, the young man, along with his family and friends, would process through the bustling streets of Rome to the Forum. The destination was the Temple of Liber, but the journey itself was a powerful announcement. The crowd would part for this solemn parade, understanding its meaning perfectly. At the heart of the ceremony was the act of offering. Before the temple, or sometimes at a household shrine, the young man would formally dedicate his child's toga and his bulla to the lares, the protective spirits of his family. This was not a casual discard, it was a sacred transaction. He was returning the instruments of his childhood to the gods who had safeguarded him, thanking them for their protection and signaling that his relationship with the divine was now that of an adult, based on votive promises and responsibility rather than passive guardianship. Following this offering, he would be clothed in the pure white toga virilis, the toga of manhood. This was the garment of the citizen, the senator, and the soldier. Its stark, unadorned whiteness was a blank slate, representing the honor and reputation he was now expected to build for himself and his family through his own deeds. While a boy's transition was a grand public affair, a girl's passage out of childhood was typically quieter, more private, and almost always defined by a single life-altering event, her marriage. For Roman girls, the end of play could arrive shockingly early by modern standards, with marriages sometimes arranged for girls as young as 12 or 13, though it was more common in the mid-teens. The engagement itself could happen even earlier, effectively shaping a girl's entire childhood with the knowledge of her impending future. The ceremony that ended her life as a girl was her wedding day, a ritual steeped in symbolism that mirrored the boy's liberalia in its finality. On the eve of her wedding, a young girl would perform her own act of dedication. She would take her most cherished childhood possession, her doll, and along with her other toys, her toga praetexta and the small balls she had played with, offer them to the household gods, most often to Venus, Diana, or the Lares. This was her nusus relinquor, her formal surrender of childish things. It was a poignant and deeply personal moment, a farewell to the companion of her youth and the imaginative world they had inhabited together. The wedding day itself was a cascade of rituals designed to sever her from her father's house and integrate her into her husband's family. Before leaving her childhood home, she would be dressed in a straight white woven tunic tied with a knot of Hercules that only her husband would be allowed to untie. Her hair was styled into the sex crines, an elaborate hairstyle traditionally worn by the Vestal virgins and brides, using a spearhead to part it, a nod to Rome's warlike origins. The phrase used to describe a bride, "You by two Gaius, ego Gaia, where you are Gaius, I am Gaia," perfectly encapsulates this transition. She was leaving behind her individual identity as a daughter to become part of a new family unit. For a girl, there was no equivalent to the toga virilis that granted new public rights. Her new status was defined entirely by her relationship to her husband. Her childhood games of managing a miniature household were over. She was now expected to manage a real one. The carefree days of playing with her doll were replaced by the immense responsibility of producing and raising heirs to continue her husband's lineage. Her play had been the rehearsal. Marriage was the opening night of a performance that would define the rest of her life. This stark contrast in their rites of passage reveals the fundamental asymmetry of Roman gender roles. A boy's transition was a celebration of gained rights and public agency. He could now inherit property in his own name, vote in the assemblies, and begin his political or military career. He was entering the world of the forum, the law courts, and the battlefield. A girl's transition, however, was a transfer of guardianship. She moved from the legal authority of her father, the paterfamilias, to the authority of her husband. Her sphere of influence shifted from one domestic setting to another, but it remained fundamentally domestic. The liberalia was a gateway to the wider world. A wedding was a recontextualization within the home. Yet both transitions shared a core purpose: to channel the individual into their predetermined societal role as efficiently as possible. The boy became a citizen soldier, the girl a wife and mother. Their toys, once the tools of their preparation, were now sacred relics of a life they were commanded to leave behind, offered to the gods as a final symbolic payment for a future of duty. But what's truly remarkable is that we don't have to journey back in time to witness these games. Their echoes are all around us, living on in the pastimes of our own era. The story of Roman play is not one of a lost world, but a continuous thread woven into the very fabric of modern recreation, a powerful testament to the enduring human need for competition, skill, and simple fun. Let's trace these direct lines from the ancient forum to the contemporary playground, and you'll see just how much of our own play culture is a legacy of those inventive Roman children. Take the simple clattering knucklebones, the game of skill played with those sheep ankle bones, involving tossing one in the air and scooping up others before catching it, is virtually identical to the game of jacks played by children for generations. The fundamental mechanics, the toss, the swift gathering, the focus on dexterity, are a direct cultural inheritance. While the materials have changed from organic bone to mass-produced metal stars and rubber balls, the core challenge remains unaltered. This is a beautiful example of how a universal human activity, the development of fine motor skills to play, found a perfect form in the ancient world that was so effective, so engaging, that it simply never vanished. It was passed down through centuries, from medieval Europe to the modern day, a quiet but persistent echo of Roman streets and schoolyards across the globe. The Roman passion for strategic board games reveals an even more profound legacy. Their game of calculi, played on a grid with colored pebbles, is the undisputed ancestor of checkers and drafts. The goal of capturing an opponent's pieces by jumping over them is a concept that has survived intact for 2 millennia, but the deeper intellectual air is undoubtedly their beloved Latrunculi, the game of little soldiers. With its focus on surrounding and immobilizing enemy pieces, its use of a special leader piece like the ducks or aquila, and its demand for deep strategic foresight, Latrunculi is the clear forerunner of chess. While chess itself evolved through Persian and Arabic cultures, its foundational principles of tactical encirclement and the high value placed on a central commanding piece were already being honed on Roman game boards. Every time 2 people sit down to a game of chess, they are participating in a tradition of mental combat that Roman officers and statesmen would have recognized instantly. And what of their more active pursuits, the dizzying, high-speed chaos of Trigon, with 3 players hurling and catching multiple balls simultaneously, finds its modern expression not in a single sport, but in the sophisticated art of group juggling and complex passing patterns. The core challenge of Trigon, tracking multiple objects while executing precise throws under pressure, is the same skill set celebrated by modern jugglers who perform elaborate passing routines in trios and quartets. The Roman emphasis on agility and hand-eye coordination in their ball games also laid the groundwork for countless future sports. Their basic games of catch and keeping a ball in the air using the knees and head are direct precursors to the modern sport of football tennis, or sepak takraw in Southeast Asia, where players volley a ball over a net using any part of their body except their hands. Even the weighted paganica ball, with its unpredictable flight, can be seen as an early attempt to create a training tool for coordination, not unlike the weighted balls used by athletes today to improve reaction time and strength. Perhaps one of the most visible and charming survivals is the humble hoop. The Roman trochus, that metal hoop guided by a hooked stick, enjoyed a spectacular revival in the 19th century, becoming a craze across Europe and America. Victorian children, much like their Roman counterparts, found endless fascination in the challenge of controlling a rolling hoop, and manufacturers produced elaborate versions in wood and metal. The very same physical principles of physics and balance that a Roman child mastered on an uneven stone street were rediscovered by children on cobblestone lanes and dirt paths centuries later. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a rediscovery of a perfect toy, one whose simple design taps into a fundamental joy of controlling motion and defying gravity, if only for a few wobbly seconds. This continuity reveals something far more significant than just the longevity of a few games. It shows us that the Romans were not merely inventors, but crucial transmitters and perfecters in the great chain of cultural history. They absorbed ideas from the Greeks, Etruscans, and other cultures they encountered, refined them with their characteristic practicality, and then spread them across their vast empire, from the misty hills of Britain to the deserts of Syria. As the legions marched and merchants traveled, so too did the rules for Latrunculi and the design for a good knucklebone. The Roman Empire acted as a massive cultural distribution network, ensuring that these forms of play took root and endured long after the empire itself had faded into history. The games survived because they answered a universal, timeless need. They provided a framework for social connection, a gymnasium for the mind and body, and a joyful escape from the demands of daily life. So the next time you see a child playing jacks or you yourself make a move in a game of chess, remember that you are participating in a living history. You are sharing a moment of play with a Roman child across 2,000 years, proving that the human spirit of fun is one of the most enduring and powerful legacies ever left behind. Now, after uncovering all these intricate details about their games, we decided to take our investigation one step further, to move from the history books into the workshop and see if we could actually play like a Roman. So we set ourselves a challenge to recreate two of their most fascinating pastimes, the cerebral board game Latrunculi and the chaotic ball game Trigon, and experience firsthand the skills these ancient children had to master. Our first project was building a Latrunculi board. We knew from historical sources that the board, or tabula, was typically a grid, often 8 squares by 8. We didn't need anything fancy. A simple piece of light-colored wood and a dark wood burning pen would do the trick. Carefully, we measured and etched the lines, creating a perfect battlefield of 64 squares. For the pieces, the millites or soldiers, we wanted something that felt authentic yet simple. We settled on a bag of flat, polished black and white glass gems, the kind used for floral arrangements. One color would be our ordinary soldiers, and we designated a single, slightly larger gem of each color to serve as the special piece, the ducks or eagle. Holding these cool, smooth pieces in our hands, it was suddenly easy to imagine a Roman father and son, or two friends in the forum, using colored stones or bits of pottery for the very same purpose. Setting up the board, we placed the pieces on the back 2 rows on each side, just as the fragmentary rules suggest, our ducks pieces safely tucked in the center of the back row. The stage was set for a battle of wits, then came the actual game. We quickly discovered that Latrunculi is deceptively simple to learn but agonizingly difficult to master. The goal is to surround your opponent's pieces, but this isn't like checkers where you just jump over someone. You have to strategically position your soldiers to create a trap, often sacrificing a less important piece to gain a decisive positional advantage. The first few moves felt slow, almost tentative as we each laid out our formations, but then the tension began to mount. I made a bold move, pushing a line of my white soldiers deep into enemy territory, thinking I was setting a clever trap. My opponent, however, saw right through it. With a few calm, calculated moves of his black gems, he not only blocked my advance but managed to surround 2 of my key pieces from the sides and behind, removing them from the board with a satisfying clink. The feeling was a strange mix of frustration and admiration. This wasn't a game of chance, it was a true mental workout, a test of foresight and patience. We found ourselves sitting in silence for minutes at a time, staring at the board, trying to anticipate the other strategy 3 or 4 moves ahead. Winning a match felt less like luck and more like a genuine intellectual triumph, a tiny taste of the strategic thinking that Roman commanders were expected to possess. But we weren't done testing our Roman skills. After the quiet intensity of the board game, it was time for some pure, unadulterated chaos. We gathered 3 people, several soft, brightly colored balls, and found a large, open, grassy field, our modern palestra. The objective of Trigon seemed straightforward enough: stand in a triangle and keep the balls in the air, throwing to one person while catching from another. How hard could it be? The answer, we discovered within seconds of starting, was incredibly, laughably difficult. We gave the signal and the first ball was thrown. Then the second, almost instantly, the system broke down into a whirlwind of confusion. You have to track 2 separate objects in your peripheral vision at all times. Just as you're focusing on catching a red ball coming from your left, a green ball is already sailing toward you from the right, and you realize you've completely forgotten to throw the blue ball you're still holding in your other hand. The air was filled with shouts of "yours," "I've got it," and "wait, which one am I throwing?" along with a lot of helpless laughter. The real challenge of Trigon isn't just the multitasking, it's the sheer physical and mental speed required. There is no time to think, only to react. Your brain is forced to process a constant, flowing stream of visual information and translate it into instantaneous motor commands. We found ourselves lunging, diving, and fumbling constantly. The most common sound was the soft thump of a dropped ball, followed by groans and giggles. After about 10 minutes, we were all breathless, not just from running, but from the intense concentration. Yet in fleeting moments, the chaos would suddenly click into a beautiful, rhythmic flow. For a glorious sequence of 5 or 6 passes, the balls would weave through the air in a perfect, silent pattern, and we would all feel a surge of collective accomplishment. Those brief moments of syncopated harmony gave us a profound appreciation for the Roman trigonarii who could perform this feat with such skill that they drew crowds of admirers. It was a stunning demonstration of how a simple concept could demand such a high level of coordinated agility. This hands-on experiment completely transformed our understanding of Roman play. Reading about a strategic board game is one thing, feeling the genuine tension of a trapped piece and the satisfaction of a well-executed encirclement is another. Learning the rules of Trigon on a page doesn't compare to the visceral, disorienting experience of being in the middle of that three-way aerial bombardment. These weren't just idle pastimes, they were sophisticated tools that honed specific, valuable skills. Latrunculi was a gymnasium for the mind, training logic, foresight, and strategic sacrifice. Trigon was a boot camp for the senses, forging quick reflexes, situational awareness, and the ability to perform under pressure. By recreating these games, we didn't just learn about history, we felt a small part of it. We connected with the Roman children and adults who found challenge, camaraderie, and joy in these ancient contests, proving that the spirit of play is a powerful bridge across the centuries. From the chaotic, laughter-filled scramble of a game of Trigon to the quiet, intense focus required by a match of Latrunculi, we've journeyed through a world of play that is as rich and complex as Roman history itself. The sheer diversity is staggering. We saw games of pure chance where a single roll of the knucklebones could bring a child face to face with the goddess Fortuna, and games of intense skill, demanding the physical precision of hoop rolling or the mental fortitude of a military commander on a checkered board. There were whimsical pastimes like keeping an air-filled follies aloft and sobering rehearsals for adulthood, where a girl's doll was a tool for learning the intricate duties of a matron and a boy's wooden sword was a heavy symbol of his future as a soldier. Their play could be universal and democratic, connecting rich and poor through the simple clatter of sheep bones on a stone step, and it could be brutally specific, grooming the children of the elite for command through mock gladiator duels and miniature legionary battles. This was not a monolithic culture of play, it was a vibrant spectrum reflecting every facet of the Roman experience. In the end, these games were far more than mere distractions for the young. They were a powerful microcosm of the entire Roman world. The deep-seated competitiveness, the celebration of strategic thinking, the underlying acceptance of a certain brutality, these were the same forces that drove the legions, animated the Senate, and filled the Colosseum. A society that valued order, discipline, and utility above all else could not allow its children's play to be an exception. Their toys and pastimes were the primary instruments of socialization, the subtle yet relentless tools used to mold the next generation of citizens, ensuring they internalized the values of their culture long before they ever donned the toga virilis. Yet for all that structure and purpose, what shines through most brightly is the simple, irrepressible joy. The laughter that erupted during a game of blind man's bluff, the triumphant shout when a hoop was steered perfectly around an obstacle, the quiet contentment of a child with a loyal dog at their side. These moments of pure, unscripted fun are what make these ancient children feel so immediately familiar to us. Their world was one of immense pressure and rigid expectations, but within the spaces of their games, they found freedom, friendship, and a space to simply be young. And that is the ultimate mystery revealed. By studying the games of Roman children, we haven't just cataloged a list of ancient pastimes, we've found a backdoor into the heart of their world. We've seen how the grand narratives of empire, conquest, and social order were all rehearsed on a small human scale in courtyards and streets. We've connected with the universal language of play, a language that needs no translation and knows no chronological bounds. The distance of 2,000 years collapses when we realize that the desire to test one's skill, to outwit a friend, to care for a cherished toy, and to share a moment of laughter is a timeless part of the human story. The Roman Empire may have fallen, but the echoes of its children's games are still with us in our own playgrounds, our board games, and our universal understanding of what it means to play. Now we want to hear from you. After this grand tour of Roman childhood, which of these ancient games would you have been most drawn to? Would you have been a strategic master of Latrunculi, patiently setting traps for your opponents, or perhaps you'd have thrived in the chaotic, high-energy whirlwind of Trigon, testing your reflexes to their limit? Maybe the simple, tactile pleasure of a game of knucklebones, or the solitary challenge of guiding a bronze hoop down a bumpy street, calls to you more. Let us know your choice down in the comments. We're genuinely curious to see which piece of ancient history you'd most like to play with. If you enjoyed this journey into the daily life of the Roman Empire, Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more adventures. We're just getting started uncovering the mysteries of the ancient world, and we'd love for you to join us on the next discovery.